All right. Well, Dario, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm. This is an open-ended conversation, but I think I'm genuinely excited to talk to you about where Dario came from.
Mm.
Your mind is there. I know you're a creative, right? You're a wonderful creative that can think through multiple different events, experientially, product-wise, detailing. Like you can imagine all that in your mind. But what I find real interesting and such a big positive is you're a doer and you can make those things happen. Like there's you know him as well, I'm sure, and you do as well, but there's a difference when you can imagine something and then you can make that something become reality, right? And so I'm real curious how that curiosity, because you've got a big brain up there
Yeah.
that you're very curious. Like where did that stem from? How did, like, could it be upbringing, your parents, your family, and
Sure.
process? So
Yeah, that's a great lead in. I've been thinking about that a little bit, especially now later in my life, because it kind of shifted, and I went back to things that were more natural and innate, and
yeah.
that I was more passionate about. But it took me a couple of years to kind of pivot. So it made me think about like the upbringing and those things. But for me, it started really early. Um, we moved around a lot. So we started, we lived in Mexico, we lived in Argentina, and then I was raised in Connecticut and on the East Coast, and the different moves, and also having four siblings. There's four of us total. My parents are from Argentina. I have a Down syndrome brother who's the oldest in the family, and then it's my sister who was a fashion designer, and she designed shoes in Paris for many years, and still lives there. And then my brother Gustavo, who had an interesting career, and he was in industrial management. He studied that at Carnegie Mellon, but then he went, and now he's building a hotel in Italy.
Wow.
And our roots are Italian, which is interesting. So, and my father grew up working in a hotel, and then he kind of pivoted and went and became an accountant, and then he became an IBMer, and he worked at IBM for like 35 years. So he's the pragmatic, linear, super, just pragmatic and linear and meticulous in his thinking. And my mom she was a homemaker, but then she was also an interior designer. So when we moved around a lot, it was her job to like make the home beautiful and decorate the home, but she also made all the curtains, and like she sewed everything by hand, and she was very crafty and hands-on, and she also cooked these like super elaborate hands-on meals.
Yeah.
So it was this combination of moving around a lot and seeing different cultures and how they live and how people make things in these different cultures. Because Argentina and Mexico, they're fabrication economies. So a lot of things are artisanal in the making process. And then growing up in Connecticut, it was more finance, and it was more, you didn't see that world, right? So it was more, but it was about how you presented yourself. So it was like the image and the finished product of a personality or a space. And then going back even further, my great uncle was a famous filmmaker, Dario Antonioni. He was an avant-garde filmmaker. Blow Up was one of his movies, and La Ventura, another one. So it was like, okay, well, he's a storyteller, right? And he used film to tell stories. So when I look at my career, I look at like the things that intrigued me growing up. It's kind of has a sprinkling of all those things. I mean, now I'm an experiential designer. I design experiences for large companies, small and large. They tend to be startups these days, and I help them visualize their brand through architecture, interior design, event design, storytelling, marketing. A lot of the work I do is around packaging the company in a marketing envelope, but it's through the workplace design, their headquarters, their showrooms. So it's multidisciplinary in that way.
Yeah.
But the seeds were kind of planted early, in how we were raised, and being super hands-on, making things. when I was very young, I got addicted to making and building remote control airplanes.
Yeah.
So it was like building these balsa wood models was, oh man, it was like we had this golf course across the street. So it was my perfect Kitty Hawk, right? It was like my Kitty Hawk where I could throw the models like right there. So I'd spend months making these things. I mean, these things had like 8-foot wingspans.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't like, they were toys, but they weren't toys to me back then. There was like, this thing was like elaborate. So that's where I channeled a lot of my energy making things. And then I would modify the airplanes, right? So I would build them and I'd be like, oh, I want this thing to fly faster, or I want it to fly longer, or what if I did this? And then, because I would crash them.
Yeah.
And when you crash them, you have to fix them. So if you're going to fix them,
one-time crash,
you might as well like tweak them slightly, right? And then I built like an arsenal of aircraft that I had like all these, Frankenstein components. And I'd be like, well, what if I take this wing and that body? And so I started to mix and match these different components. And that's what sparked aerospace for me, like the interest in aerospace. And then in high school, I stitched together 3 classes, and no one had done this back then. I didn't know why, because maybe it was like feeding my ADD, but it was, back then we had shop class. Remember how you would have like welding class or automotive class? So I took the shop class, a 2D CAD. We had like AutoCAD, early on AutoCAD, and then a science class, and I wove them together and created my own like little maker class. And I designed and built a hovercraft from scratch.
Oh, wow.
And some of the components were off the shelf, and then some of them I made myself, right? So using like the metal shop and spot welding and the lathe. And
did it work?
And it worked. So I got to fly it around the student center, and then I ended up winning this award from MIT, and then everyone's like, you got to be an engineer. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be an engineer. So then I went to school at U of M to study engineering, and then I pivoted into aerospace engineering. And then my 3rd year, I'm like, when do we get to build things? What happened to like, it was all theoretical. It was all math. It was all, airfoil design. It was very, academically heavy, intense, and very theoretical, and very minimal hands-on. The hands-on would come like later in like grad school and stuff like that. So it was hard for me it was not holding my interest in that way. And then I discovered industrial design. Yeah. And I discovered the Art Center in Pasadena. And when I went to go visit it, it was like, whoa, the light bulb just went off, because it was like, Art Center is a really unique place. It's a craft school, basically. It's a trade school, but at a very, very high level, and it focuses on like the traditional arts. So there was like film, there was photography, there was graphic design, industrial design, and then experiential design, and then they had what's that track? Entertainment design. So like people that go to Art Center end up designing cars. Yeah. They end up becoming filmmakers. They end up becoming, interior architects, product designers. I mean, furniture makers. I mean, so it was like, I found what my upbringing gave me in an educational context, right? Like the making, the linear thinking, the narrative, the storytelling, all of that in a very small school. There was only 2,000 students at Art Center. Yeah. So it was like, wow, this was my place. And then I just dove in and then, learned the art of industrial design and product design. And then,
how did you, so you're navigating this pathway at a very young age, and you're putting all these pieces together that seem compiled in an arena, so to speak, that's going to set the track. But along the way, who's guiding you? Who are you talking to?
Mentors.
Who
that's strong mentors. At Art Center, there was the track for furniture design, and furniture design was the only class at that time, more so than even like product design, which allowed you to travel the world. Like if you designed some cool furniture product and it made the cut, the school would take you to the Paris Furniture Show or the Milan Furniture Show or the German, furniture show to advertise the school. So I was like, that sounds freaking cool. Let's do that. Because again, like my multicultural background, I was like, speaking multiple languages. So I jumped on that. And one of our teachers, David McCarskey, he was super passionate about everything around furniture. And he became, a mentor of mine, and he had a successful practice. My products ended up making the cut, and I got to go like all over the world, and won awards. So then I dove heavy into furniture because I was making royalties, and I never knew what royalties were until the paycheck started coming in. And then I got a job right when I graduated working for Gensler, designing, architectural interiors, just fresh out of school. But after a year working at Gensler, my royalties from the furniture superseded my income as an architect. And I was like, wait a second, what are these royalties? Right. I'm like, I get paid a percentage for every product sold. I was like, and how many of those bars did I sell? Yeah. So when that light bulb went off, I said, wow, I can free myself from this job thing. I don't have to do a 9 to 5. Yeah. I can dive full into the furniture just to get more royalties coming in the door, and then I can pursue my own projects. Yeah. So I did that, and then I met another mentor, which was interesting because this was through the furniture world, which was just so weird.
And how old were you at this point?
I'm in my 20s, early 20s. So Scott Morgan, his family owned a very large furniture company, and I met them at like the trade shows I would go to. And he saw me one day, and I was with my father because he had come with me, and I designed this like crazy cool folding, aluminum lounge chair that looked like an airplane component. It was had a lot of aerospace influence. And he saw it, and he said, "What is this thing? This thing's amazing. And you're here with your dad, and your dad's Italian. Oh, I love Italians." And then next thing you know, we became friends. And then he kind of shepherded me around the more higher level manufacturers in the furniture world and opened some doors for me. So now I'm designing for different companies. I'm designing sofas, steel and glass product, and then expensive things and then inexpensive things coming from overseas, Indonesia, China, Taiwan, Mexico, these fabrication economies. So I got exposure through the furniture. I got exposure on how things are made at scale. Yeah. And not just at scale, but how do you ship them around the world and maximize the yield in a container? Mm-hmm. So that like opened up another, door, because now I was like, oh, if I can understand this world of making things and maybe I can make my own things. Yeah. And then after about 10 years or so, or 8 years of doing it for other people, I started to launch my own collections. Mm. And then I would do, and we ended up having 3 collections of our own. But going back to Scott Morgan, he'd say, "You need to meet my crazy brother." I'm like, "What's with your crazy brother?" He's like, "He's an aerospace designer." I go, "Yeah." and he works for a company called Scale Composites in Mojave, which is like world famous because Burt Rutan, he started that company, him and his brother. And they built all this stuff for Richard Branson, and they built, Spaceship One, Spaceship Two. They built like all these incredible, award-winning, like super famous aerospace experimental aircraft. So this is his brother who works there. And he's like, "You got to meet him." So I'm like, "Yeah, I've got to meet him because I love airplanes, right?" And I didn't want to keep doing furniture for the rest of my life. Yeah. I'm like, so it's me. So I ended up meeting him, and that was the next mentor. Mm. Right. So it was like the furniture David McCarskey, the furniture, and then meeting Scott Morgan, and then, elevating the furniture, learning about making things all over the world and understanding the global economics of product manufacturing. Yeah. And then meeting Bob Morgan, he was a propulsion engineer. And then I got to tour the scaled factory where they were making Spaceship 2 at the time, the one that carried, the X Prize rocket that went to space. And when I got to tour that thing and I got to go inside the carbon fiber fuselage and all this stuff, I was just like, "Well, this is like the coolest thing I've ever seen." Like seriously, it was like, you're making this by hand. You're designing it on computer. Yeah. You're making it by hand. There's the carbon layup is all done by hand. And this is a spaceship. It's going to go to space. Yeah. It's like, so I was like, I need to get in here somehow.
Were you already up to that point? Because you mentioned doing model planes early on. Were you still interested in aerospace up to that point? Or was this kind of bringing you back to your childhood going, "Oh, wow, like this is touching on something that I loved early on.
Yeah, no, I got sidetracked. So like, I didn't have time to build model planes anymore. And I thought that was like a dumb hobby at that point because it was like bringing money in the door, right? So I got away from that only when I started to get a little bit more success and have some more money coming in the door, and I was able to have a little bit more free time. I opened up that door again, and then I got back into the RC hobby. But I was building much bigger airplanes with bigger engines, and now they were like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, toys. And so I was doing that while I was running my design practice on the side. But I wanted to figure out a way to bring all my skill sets together and get back into aerospace. And I didn't really know how to do that because I can't design aircraft like real ones.
Yeah.
Right. But I can. So what I did is I went to an air show called Oshkosh. And I don't know if you guys have heard of Oshkosh, but wow, is it cool. Yeah. It's like Woodstock for airplanes. Yeah. Okay. So you get there and it's in Wisconsin, in Oshkosh. And it happens over like a 9-day time frame. People from all over the world fly in, and then they have there's the EAA is there, the Experimental Aircraft Association, and Richard Branson was doing a talk. And that's why I went. And he was with Burt Rutan and these other guys that were funding the space program through the X Prize. So I went to go hear that talk, and then I got to walk around and see everything. And then they have like one camp for like, pre-World War I, World War I, World War II aircraft. And then they have like, experimental stuff. And then they've got crop dusters, and they've got like, biplanes. And then it was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like people like, this is what they're doing. They're like, they make their own aircraft. And seeing a Mustang up close, like just the polished aluminum, and like, it was like, whoa, this is cool. So I walked around and I was like, what can I do here? How can I network? What am I going to do? And it was 2008 when the economy had tanked.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like a good moment to like reflect, pause, and pivot. And I wanted to get out of the furniture space. I had been doing it for 20 plus years. I just didn't feel compelled to draw or model another piece of furniture. It was just like I felt like I had done everything at that point in time, in every material all over the world. So then walking through Oshkosh, I said, maybe I could help these companies like with their trade show booths, as a way in. So I met this company called Icon Aircraft. They were building this super cool folding wing, all carbon composite aircraft for 2-seater. It was a light sport aircraft, for a sports pilot's license. It only takes 20 hours to fly versus the traditional 40. And I also wanted to get back into flying. So I was like, I could fly this. I could learn to fly this. I can get back into aviation. This thing's cool. Their trade show booth sucks. It was like designed by aerospace engineers. It was just like terrible. So I met the founders, and Steen and Kirk, and going back to mentors. Steen became my next mentor now. Yeah. And he became a mentor for a good 10 plus years. And him and Kirk started Icon Aircraft. Incredible story from an entrepreneurial perspective. I had a front row seat for like the first 15 people that joined the company.
Wow.
Steen went to Harvard. He went to Stanford. Kirk went to Stanford. Kirk was an ex-F-16 pilot. So you had like the brawn, which was Kirk. And then you had Steen, who was like the linear, pragmatic Chacho, my father. Like, so it was like finding this interesting kind of balance between the two founders. And then I came in and helped them package their product in a really compelling storytelling way to help get orders in the books. And we ended up, getting 5,000 plus orders over like a 3-year time frame. I helped them do that through all the trade show booths that I designed, which won like best of show. And I designed their headquarters. I designed the future factory. I designed every single facility that made up the Icon world. I touched. Yeah. Right. So different scales, designing a factory and the inside of a factory, and the storytelling mechanics of how you go through the factory to help get an order of an aircraft. Yeah. Right. So that's the filmmaker, the Michelangelo thing. It's like it goes back and it threads the needle between all these different people who touched my life. I ended up consulting for Icon for maybe like, I don't know, 6 years or something. Then they brought me on full time because the company was growing quickly. And then they found a place in Vacaville, California, which was next to an airport, Natri Airport, where they could build their headquarters. So then I helped them design the headquarters, the future customer delivery center, the factory, and then another factory in Mexico. And I speak perfect Spanish. So going to Mexico was like, it was great and easy. And that again tied into the whole like fabrication economy and having traveled the world designing furniture. Now I'm designing a factory in Mexico, and it's like, it's easy because it feels familiar, just a very different scale, right? And it was fascinating. I mean, it never felt like a day of work in my life at that moment in time. And then, you know, startups are hard, aviation's hard. And then we had a couple tragic things that happened back to back. We had some pilot fatalities. John Carco, who's a very famous aerospace test pilot and aerospace engineer. He was our lead aero engineer for this aircraft. He was taking up a new employee that just came on from Ford, who was leading our manufacturing strategy and setting up the manufacturing line. They took it up for a routine flight. It was an intro flight. It was the second week on the job, the new hire, and John made a mistake. He was flying into Lake Berryessa, and he went into the canyons, which were the airplane is meant to be meant to be flown low altitudes, low and slow, and that's what makes it fun because you're like, you know, carving up the territory nice and low, and you can land on the water. So he went into the canyon thinking he was going into one particular finger, they call them. That you come in and then they kind of navigate, and then they open up, and then you're in the big lake. But he went in, and he thought it was this one particular inlet. And when he turned the corner, it was a box canyon. It didn't open up to the lake.
Get out of it.
And he couldn't get it. He had 3 options. You could either like pull up, try to turn, or nosedive. So he tried to turn, and as he was doing that, he clipped a wing, and they crashed, and they both died instantly. And then we had a famous baseball player die. So we had these tragic. The plane was so fun and easy and safe to fly that people were flying is still. It's an unforgiving pastime, right? So you make a mistake. It's not like a moped. I mean, it's not like maybe it's like a motorcycle, but like the likelihood of you walking away from an aircraft accident is very
mistakes.
Is very low.
Yeah.
So that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And we didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
And then the investors pulled the funds. We had to put the brakes on. The FAA came in, and it was like the dark moment of this incredible experience. And then everything came to a scratching halt, and then people were getting replaced. And then the OG group that we were now like at 300 people, but the original group that I was a part of, they all left. And then it was time to go.
Yeah.
You know, so
it's interesting. Is that, I don't follow that world that much, but is that, I'm assuming the startups are rare in their aircraft industry, or maybe they're not.
Well, now they're more so because of the whole VTOL thing.
Yeah.
Right. And now the vertical takeoff and now aviation's hot again because of companies like Uber and the X Prize. And so, and now, you know, carbon composites is now a thing.
Yeah.
But it's only maybe 20 years new, you know? So aircraft are stronger, lighter, and now you can make them battery powered. So now the VTOL thing is like vertical takeoff, right, where you have the 4 propellers. So it's now with the electric cars coming in and making the batteries more powerful and more lighter, and that technology evolving, it's now ripe to go into aviation because all the things are starting to match up, the weight, the power of the batteries. You know, the motors can get smaller.
Yeah.
So fly-by-wire, like all this stuff, the software. So it's hot again.
Yeah.
So,
but back then, I guess maybe you would call it remote pilot to help with the fatality issue. Was that a thing back then, or was that just human error that?
It was complete human error. In this aircraft wasn't ever meant to be autopilot. It was meant to be, you know, a motorcycle of the sky. Like it was meant to be flown with the windows out.
Yeah.
Super visceral. Like not in a Cessna, not, you know, learning to fly in a Cessna is a very like painful experience. I don't know if you've ever like
Yeah,
gone on a discovery flight or something.
I went through getting my license twice and ended up stopping midway through, and that's
because the
a whole
Cessna
nother
didn't hold
story.
your interest, probably.
Well, it got to the point where I didn't love it enough to take it seriously enough to be safe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That
completely makes sense.
I went through both times. Early one, I was too young and I was starting to have a family, and I thought it's too big of a risk. And the second time was about a year and a half ago, and I soloed again. I flew around. There's so much involved. I was like, man, I can't dedicate enough time to really get to be an expert at it that I would feel safe
doing this all the time.
Doing it all the time, taking my family up.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm a bad risk profile for this. I loved it. Don't get me wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
not an unfamiliar feeling. I mean, I've had those same feelings too.
Yeah. Well, and I start hearing a lot of these stories of people, that were by all accounts really competent pilots just making a small mistake, and that's it, and I was like, I don't love it enough to really to do it anymore. But how long did you fly, and do you still fly now?
I flew for a while there, and I was flying the Icon a bunch. One of the perks of the jobs, we got to take it up whenever we wanted to, and we did. I mean, flying that aircraft in the Napa Valley, look at that. They were in Lake Berryessa and Nuttry Airport and Vacaville. It's like a 25-minute drive to Napa. So you're in Napa Valley, California, which is just like ridiculously beautiful, right? So and then you have San Francisco, like a 20-minute jaunt over there on the aircraft. So we would take the plane up and just do these we'd fly over the Golden Gate. We'd fly into Sausalito, and it was like, wow, this is so cool.
Are these like single engine high wing?
It's a pusher prop.
Yeah.
At high wing.
Yeah.
Pusher prop. So the cockpit's like super open, very visceral. It was the best aircraft that I have ever flown compared to even like a biplane or an Eclipse or a Cessna. This was just felt really fun to fly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got those feelings too. If I keep doing this, I'm eventually going to probably crash. And I've got girls now and I have family, and I don't really want to go down that way. Maybe I'll pick it up in retirement.
Yeah.
When I'm in my 70s, 80s, and
Sure.
if I crash, I'll avoid the old okay, no wheelchair for me.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you go, and this is a much longer conversation, maybe not, but when you go to Mexico to build a factory, I mean, there's a lot involved in that. What is your priorities when you go and you're designing this? I mean, is it for output? Is it for, because again, I'm interested in how you tie in an experiential component to it. Like, how do you think about that when you're going to go down to Mexico and build a factory?
Right. Well, the Mexico decision was driven by cost, right? So we had the factory up and running in Vacaville, and we had 2 huge buildings. It probably comprised maybe I think it was 175,000 square feet between the 2 buildings. And one of the buildings was carbon layup and composites. So you come in and you have all these gigantic jigs, and that's where all the carbon components are made, and the ovens to bake everything. It comes out of that building. It's kind of like really dirty work. Think of it like an automotive repair shop. It's just like very dusty and not very clean. And then we have CNC machines that cut out the carbon pieces, and then you get these parts, and then they go over to final paint and assembly, which was the second building. And in that building, it's cleaner. We paint everything, we assemble it, and then we get all the instrumentation and all the components into it, and it's all integration, and it goes through an assembly line. So we built the factories, and we started to produce our first aircraft, and we were trying to sell this thing for $200,000, but it was coming out at the end over $500,000.
Yeah.
And we're like, what the hell? Our order book just went from 5,000 units down to 1,200. We're like, we got to rethink this business plan. So all the smart people that were there got together and were like, let's take the hardest work, the most expensive work, and take it to Mexico, because it was manual. A lot of it was manual, the carbon layup. So they ran the numbers, and they figured, let's build the carbon factory in Mexico, in Tijuana. And then that should bring our cost down. I don't even know what the factor was, but now the plane today sells for about $320, $280. So it did work, it brought the cost way down. And they're still manufacturing the aircraft. The company is still operational. Just the original leadership team's gone. But going back to your question about, how do you figure out where to go in Mexico? So it's driven by, where is there a site available for the size that we need? So we knew we already had the factory built in the US. So we had that, we knew the footprint, we knew how to make it better. And we said, let's go find that footprint in Mexico. Let's find a competent contractor that's built factories before.
Gotcha.
And in TJ, we did a tour. So we went down there and we toured all the different factories the contractor that we ended up hiring built, and he had built medical manufacturing. Like we toured a Class A, I forgot it was like an ISO 1000, Finnish plant where they made like syringes and blood bags and all this kind of pharmaceutical, a product. And we were blown away. We would never imagine this was being made in Mexico. This is not like wicker chairs. This is like, like syringes. And I'm like, wow, okay, cool. You can do this. So then we laid it out, we designed it. They had local people, local architects and local contractors build it all out. And then it was a tilt-up concrete structure. It wasn't anything real fancy, but we put some lipstick on it and made it look really cool, and we branded it. But it was more about, it looked like a normal traditional factory from the outside. Just a big box and then some logoing and some colors. But then when you go inside, it was, again, the workplace design. So it's like going in there and designing a compelling, different work environment that you don't normally see in a factory. And then again, being super conscious about how people are going to navigate it. So now the potential owners are going to go there, or tours, or future employees, they come in and they tour it. So it's like Tesla has done a really good job of this. Like if you go buy a Tesla, you're welcome to go tour one of their factories. And we did that as a learning experience. And it was like, this is freaking cool. Like you become an evangelist of the brand when you can see what goes into making the product, and that's also really considered.
Can you describe what that difference is? So from the original facility to the next facility, you said we did it differently. What do you think? Is that taking in perspective the employee's experience per day? Or the manufacturing, the linear sequencing of how do you build a product?
It was more around where are things getting clogged up, and like we don't have enough staging space. Like we were learning things that we didn't know that we learned. Like we ended up having to stage product outside in the parking lot at the original factory, because there was a backlog.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize how big the jigs were and what that backlog was like until it was actually happening. Like, it's really hard to think through every little thing, right?
Yeah.
So then in Mexico, it was like, oh, we need to 3x the staging area, and it's got to be weatherproof. Like we can't have this expensive stuff be exposed, to the elements. So things like that. It was more like a second chance at proper space planning.
Yeah.
And then allocating, and then adjacencies, right? Like, oh, it would have been better if we had put this particular production cell or this process in the middle of these two, because when you go to move the product, you're moving at less distance.
Yeah.
So it's like things like that.
Yeah.
And it's harder to do in an existing factory because it's not the cost isn't warranted, because to pull something up, stop production, move everything and go back, you can't really do that.
Yeah.
Right. But when you're starting from scratch, then you can take a second stab at it. So that's where the improvements came in. And then taking people through, that's just going to be, when you're looking at cool, interesting things, as long as you're designing an interesting pathway. And then where do you stop? Where do you have a conversation? Where are the vantage points super compelling, where here's a natural node where there's a lot to look at and a lot to talk about. So why don't we take a moment here and make it like an exhibition and do like a storytelling wall, or show some historical diagrams that show why this is the way it is. Yeah. So those, instead of, an engineer might not want to do that because he's focused on the parts.
thing. Yeah.
And someone like myself is like, no, we're telling a story here.
Yeah.
So we can sell those parts.
Yeah. How do you do that? Because again, an engineer's mind, and I'm not an engineer, but it seems like they're heavy on functionality, right, and efficiencies.
Right.
If you're a storyteller and experiential, like how do you marry those up? How do you speak that language with an engineer to get what you need done?
Oh, it's hard. I was telling Mark, like, I'm going through that now. So now I'm working for a different aerospace company called JetZero in Long Beach, and they're building what hopes to be a competitor to Boeing and Airbus to compete with passenger aircraft. this plane is 50% more efficient. It carries the same amount of passengers. It can do more routes than traditional aircraft without having to use a different aircraft model, right? So it's a really cool, amazing business case, but it's heavy engineering, right? So we have a lot of legacy engineers from Boeing and Airbus and NASA coming in, and they want to do things a very certain way. They've been doing it that way for 30, 40 years. And these guys they're experts in their domain. They have lived it, right? And then we have the marketing and fundraising side of the company being like, we're never going to build those aircraft until we can raise a shit ton of money. Right?
Yeah.
So like billions of dollars have to get raised. So there's this battle between, we need to do it this way, and we want things laid out like this, and we need the factory floor to look, the R&D facility to be like this. And then Tom, our founder, will walk in there and be like, this looks like shit, or this doesn't work, or our head of cabin will be like, this is not compelling, like we know. So I'm trying to come in and navigate the impact that people are going to see, not just investors, but future hires, and balancing, okay, let's make it pragmatic and work for the engineers, right? So this is my father's brain coming in and saying we need to be able to deliver what we need to deliver. But if we pick this thing up and put it over here and rotate it at 45, or put it over here and move it over here and make it front and center, as you come in, there's a strong datum. What do you want to see? The front of the airplane or the tail ass end of it? Is it better at 3/4? Or is it better like looking like it's about to take off? What's going to be more compelling? And you can, when you start playing around and you move things around in the 3D model, you can tell what's going to like aesthetically look better.
Yeah.
The engineers don't care about that.
Yeah.
They care about, it's too far from the hangar door, or how am I going to get the tube components in there? Now you're making me walk an extra like 200 yards. And we're like, you're going to walk those extra 200 yards because it'll keep you in shape, and we're going to get more money in the door.
That's right. It'll keep you
So
employed.
it's this interesting dance between a lot of times you have to be able to produce in really enticing visuals to get your ideas across in a really compelling way, so that you can make the arguments that you want to make, because people can't imagine it without seeing it in 3D or in some kind of illustration. So that's kind of what I'm spending my time doing now. The facility we have now is 300,000 square feet, 7 buildings. And building an aircraft like this is very complicated. You've got different labs that are required, and it makes for an incredible tour. But raising money is also a big challenge.
But how are you able to influence those engineers? Because I can understand them being like, this is all we care about. This is what's important, and how do you go about influencing them to say, hey, look,
we're building rapport, spending a lot of time with them, and saying, how much do you love this job? Isn't it
Gaining
cool that
trust.
we get to that we get to build
right.
the future for our kids, and then they start to trust you, and you're in the weeds with them.
Yeah.
You can't go in there and make them feel like they're being not heard and stepped on. You don't want to disrespect them. So you want to make sure that you're hearing all of their compelling rationale for why, and then making sure that it's like the 80-20 rule, right? Like we're going to hit 80% of your wants, but 20% you're going to have to kind of like not do it the way you're used to doing it. And you're going to have some trust, because we did it here this way for Tesla. We did it this way for Spin Launch. We did it this way for this guy and for Ducati showrooms. And we're going to do things slightly different because we're trying to do something that's never been done before.
Yeah.
So then they're like, okay, well, you're the visual guy, and like, okay, well, we trust you. So it's that.
Did you work for Tesla? You just mentioned.
No, I never worked for Tesla. I was just using that as an example. But
Gotcha.
I did design the showrooms for Ducati, and I designed Starbucks coffee shops. 720 of them in Southern California. So from an experiential point of view, right. So when their stock tanked, they brought Howard Schultz back in, and he hired 4 companies to come in and reimagine the coffee experience.
Yeah.
So we were one of those companies, and we did that, and they implemented part of our strategy on a big scale. And it's really powerful how the storytelling mechanics spatially can reinvigorate the brand and get the brand back on its feet and build that trust with the customer. So we're trying to do that. I'm trying to do the same thing, but through a different set of objectives, right? Here it's raising the money, getting the buy-in from the investors, bringing in the best talent in the world. Where does the best talent want to work?
Mm-hmm.
They want to work in a place that looks kick-ass, where you're doing something super ambitious, and it's going to be better than going to Boeing or better than going to Airbus or NASA, because that stuff looks stale and old.
Yeah.
Right. So there's multiple things that we're trying to do. And again, it's about, that balance of trying to get it all sequenced, right? So it's not one discipline. It's being able to put on a different lens, and have empathy and consideration for the. It's not a specialty. It's like being a generalist.
Yeah. How has the recent issues with Boeing affected what you're doing, if at all?
I mean, it's been very.
Is it in the conversation?
It's been very helpful for us. I mean, we don't want to poo-poo on the giants of the world. We want to take what they've done and carry them forward and lift up all those efforts. A lot of the stuff that we're working on was pioneered at some of these companies. They just didn't believe in it enough to fully fund it or take it all the way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unfortunate what's happening, and a lot of the folks, it's very sad, because some of these people that work with us, they've been there, most of their career. But it's a good lesson to be learning, right? That you don't, when it's driven by stockholder value and not the safety of the passengers or the safety of the product.
Yeah.
And now you're eroding the trust. Now you just screwed your stock price. So it's like, what's leading here?
Yeah.
But we're far away from that. We just got to build the first couple birds and make sure that they fly before we get.
It's interesting to hear you talk, but it makes me wonder. It doesn't sound like there's really any barriers to what you do, right? You've been able to put yourself in a realm where you're affecting groups of people that are in different sections of the company or the market, right? It could be investors, it could be engineers, it could be the worker, it could be a visual wall, it could be a lot of different things. And I don't know if it was on this podcast or listened to something else, but I heard, but I remember the effectiveness of telling a story and believing that story and having that authenticity of that story and moving people, and the power of telling a story will move your, if you want to call it career, or it'll move you in areas where you can't imagine. You can have the most creative people or the most successful, not necessarily creative, but you can have those people that are just big brain and cannot relate. They may not go anywhere, they may, and you can have the equally as talented that can tell a story that can move populations.
Yep, that's very true.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that it's real interesting to know that you have this innate ability, which I already know, right? I've known you for a while, but to put yourself in a room and have that confidence and to have that curiosity about the other side and the sincerity of the moment to negotiate or to move or to speak and to get this whole crowd of people to essentially, do something new that they may be uncomfortable with. That's gaining alignment and gaining consensus is an art, right? And the thing is, I this is not something that I like consciously set out to do. It's just a natural. It became a natural. I don't think
fit.
It ever is.
Right.
Yeah,
it became a natural fit, like for what interests me and what I am naturally good at. Right. So it was like, oh, I found my place. It makes for a hard job role description, or like
that's what I was.
It's not like
maybe that's the point I was getting at.
Sometimes I just call myself like a special projects lead because I'm not an architect, because I'm not an industrial designer, because I'm not an aerospace. It's like I'm not any of these things. I'm like a little bit of every one of them. But then we come in and we empower the folks that do that work at the highest level, we bring them in and they become a component of the experience.
Yeah.
Right. So, it was like when we worked together on that cannabis shop that we worked on, right? That was like an interesting example, right? So it was like, we ended up collaborating. I don't know if he told you, but we collaborated on the largest cannabis shop in North America. Is this okay to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
On Texas podcast.
You can say anything.
It's legal in California.
That's right.
But it was a perfect case of, okay, this company's called Airfield Supply Company. They have like a name associated with aerospace. So that's why they found me. And they were putting wings on a wall and being like, oh, this is Airfield Supply Company. We're like the best cannabis shop. And we're like, you painted a runway on the ground, you slapped a wing off the side of the building, and you got propellers at the entrance. It was like, that's called applied nostalgia.
Yeah.
Like that works in a restaurant or like, maybe some theme thing, but they were very successful. These guys were printing money and they wanted to grow and scale. And they also had to win the award from the city of San Jose to they were only giving away 5 licenses and it was like hyper competitive. Mm-hmm. So we did this deep dive, and remember how we brought in that company to do the whole brand strategy analysis. Mm-hmm. And this is a perfect example of like most companies, unless they're attuned to the power of storytelling and branding and how that can impact consumer loyalty, right, and consumer evangelism, they're not going to put the dollars there. They'll be like, what? I don't need a new logo. They completely don't understand what the exercise is about. It's not about the color, about the logo. It's about what are your customers resonating with and how they understand you versus how you think they understand you. Mm. It's about getting a pulse on the real world, how you fit into their world, not how you think they fit into their real world. And then you design around that feedback. So that's what we did. Yeah. We went out and we did this brand analysis. And then what did they do? They did a competitive analysis. They went and saw like 40 different cannabis shops. And then they analyzed them. And then we figured out like what their customers like. We interviewed all of the customers from Airfield Supply Company. And then we mapped out on this big board, like, okay, price, luxury, expectation, where's the available white space for this brand to live? And we found that they had a niche that nobody else was kind of owning. And then we went back and said, this has nothing to do with aviation. This is not about like putting wings on it. This is about getting high as a place or a destination. Mm-hmm. So how can we translate the name Airfield Supply Company to convey this concept of destination? That's not wings on a plane. Yeah. So we came back and we said, well, how do we create that? And we went through a different exercise and we created these different hubs, and it doesn't look anything like an airplane, and now it gives the brand something more authentic that they can scale, and they ended up loving it. It won the award. It got ins, and now they're building it. It's up and running.
That's right. Have you seen it? Have you been?
I haven't been there. Okay. No, they did change a lot from a value engineering point of view, but it got built.
Now, have you ever been hired by a company? Doesn't matter who or what. They like what you do. They believe in what you do. They think they want something new or better in some form or fashion. But they can't, but there's a conflict in terms of them fully leaning into the brand, either it's the experience, the aesthetic. But have you ever came to a conflict in the middle of the way where they just won't agree to fund or do the things that you believe will make them push them over the edge to a better thing?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a particular project in which that happened.
Or do you get them full buy-in, day one?
No. There's a lot of hand-holding is not the right word. It's more about, maybe education is the right word, but or uncovering is the right word. So through a process, that's not always the same process. The process is kind of ad hoc based on what we're trying to do. And a lot of that process is driven intuitively, right? It's like, how are we going to ask questions that haven't been asked before? And how can we uncover? Here's a good example. Okay, so when we were doing Starbucks, there was multiple companies involved. And some of them were very large traditional architecture firms.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a certain way of doing things.
Yeah.
Okay. They're driven by a different set of principles and things that drive those business models. When we came in, we said, okay, we're going to do some interviews with your customers. You're losing market share. What's wrong with the experience? I don't know what's wrong. Let's go figure it out. So we did that. And one of the things intuitively that came out of this like discovery process was a question that we asked, which shaped the entire strategy and was what like the winning question that nobody was asking. And the question was, when we get a customer in the door, for how long do we have that customer?
Mm-hmm.
And we realized that in answering that question, that there was 3 customer types. We had like the daily guy who was there every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be with you a certain amount of time. We had the neighborhood local who's going to hang out for like 4 hours. And then we had the tourist who comes in maybe to get some reprieve and needs a little break, and they're familiar with the brand because it's familiar, and they might stay with you for like an hour
Mm-hmm.
and like to collect their thoughts and then go back on the road. So knowing that, we ended up designing 3 different experiences for those consumers. They had a different footprint. They had a different amount of time to capture your attention, a limited menu or an expanded menu, or they may have had an experiential component to it. So one of them was called the signature Starbucks. One of them was called the regional Starbucks. And one of them was called we called it the hit and go, but like the super fast, small, like to go version. The to go serve people that know what they want. They want it fast. And then when I get the hell out, they have a coffee addiction. So it's like, I don't need to try something new. Like I want it in and out. So we call it like it was the in and out. So it was very streamlined getting in and out of that particular. It was a small footprint. You're in and out, and there was more of them because there was more customers like that. And then the regional one felt more like your neighbor's house. It had more neighborhood art. We would engage with people locally and put in relevant things of the neighborhood. Like, let's say if it was in Long Beach, it would have a nostalgia wall to aircraft being made in the 20s.
Yeah.
Or if it was in Hollywood, it would be like movie stuff, right? So we would make it regional and felt like being really at home and very comfortable and dark.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd come in and you'd hang out. And then we had the signature Starbucks, which was a place for you to come in, you're European, you're touring, LA, and you need a break. So a place for your kids to hang out and play. So distracting your children and making them uncomfortable, having an experience like coffee roasting, and then having a gigantic map on the wall telling you where you should go next for your LA experience. Like, here are the tourist highlights. So now the brand is delivering something that makes you feel taken care of, right? And it was like a total eye opener. And that was the strategy that was implemented.
I love that.
And it came out of that process, right? So it's not like a designer shouldn't come in and automatically know what needs to get designed or built.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
more like when you hire a celebrity designer that has a very strong aesthetic,
Yeah.
right? Like a Frank Gehry or something.
Yeah.
My process is not like that. I have no idea
Yeah.
what the thing's going to look like.
Yeah. Oftentimes I'll get invited to look at a project, and there's sometimes a little bit of awkwardness. And I had this a couple of weeks ago where we're looking at this blank lot, beautiful view. There's a lot of visual amenities around it, and the folks say, "What do you think? What do you imagine?" I'm just like, "I don't know. I have no idea." I mean, it's not. We need to we need to go through this process and these questions and all these other things for me even imagine what could be here.
Right. So what's your design process? I mean, you have an architectural background.
Architectural,
right?
but it's very. I mean, it touches on a lot of the things that you're speaking about in terms of what is the experience, and it's just not the thing. We're not interested in the trophy itself, the shell. We're interested in, okay, well, how do you drive to this? What is your first visual of this place, of the site? Where do you park? How do you get out of your car? What's the pattern into which you park, and then go to the front door? What are those little nuances that you get to centrally, experience along the way without being, a golden wall? Like we're not interested in that so much.
Right,
so it's mostly, what are the cues that make you sit and pause? And
Yeah, those are we call those like micro moments.
that's right.
Right.
That's
You
right.
take the micro moments and they become an aggregate
And
of
it's
a
very
feeling.
subtle.
Yeah.
Because again, you don't want to be slammed in the face and you don't want to give it all away at one moment.
Right.
But you want to have these subtleties along the way that will keep you coming back.
Right.
And every time you come back, you're gonna perceive something different in a different manner.
Yeah.
And so brand specific, it's about the user, the occupant. It's about the context. It's about all those things. So yeah, on initial site visit, have no idea.
Right.
And sometimes that's off-putting, right? I can tell they're like, who the fuck are you? Like, why can't you imagine my building right now?
Yeah, so I have a question for you in that regard. Like when you were involved with the Torchy tacos,
Which Jeremy did.
Which you built, right?
Yeah, I ran the department that did all the development for Torches.
Okay, so so this is interesting, right? So you have a successful. How much is brought to the architect or designer already baked? Like this is our playbook, and how much room is there to improve or find an opportunity to maybe add something to that? And and then do you find how do you navigate that process?
Yeah. Well, it could be a real interesting back and forth because they did a great job imagining the culture, right? And then they also had a kit of parts that you use, color, materiality, logo, brand. I had imagined what we did differently was, I'm a fidgeter, right? I move around. I like to see, I like to touch, I like to do and when I'm standing in line, even when I'm getting up to the door, I like to have things that gain my attention. And so there are experiences in a way that I thought we help the brand, and that could be some of the ceiling movement, that could be what we imagine them doing in the queue line, that could be some subtle things without saying we're going to completely reimagine everything. We tried to use the kit of parts that were given to us and then reassembled them in a way that offered curiosity. And then that curiosity was applied not as a general format, but we imagined it being different per zone. There was an intimate zone, there's a more social zone. There were these volumes that were treated a little bit differently. Some were lit, some were not lit, in a way that just offered you, a moment. And I thought that's what we offered.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I best time of my life building and developing and doing all that was with Torchies. We spent 9 years there. But first and foremost, we had one of the owners. Shout out to Farrell Cabina. That I think he was a visionary. He was a very big picture guy. He was over all the design and construction and real estate at the ownership level. His number one mandate to us was go build cool shit. Like go build cool stuff, but don't cut any corners. Do it with authenticity. Do it with integrity. And so, when I got involved, I think it was at that level store like 6 or 7, and they already had a pretty big following. Culture was strong. People loved the brand. And so we developed out this process of working with really talented designers and like bringing in, the best people that got the brand, that understood the brand. And we would sit down and go, the kit of parts was, we've got our brand colors, the red, gray, black. We've got a fairly solid kit of materials that we wanted to try to implement every time. The CMU block early on, reclaimed wood, road reflectors. But here you go wow us. Like go reimagine it with these guidelines here, but go reimagine. Like we don't want to push you to say go do more. We want you to come back and show us a concept. We want to rein you guys back. And I used to love. I mean, that was my favorite part, was talking to Mark or some of the other folks we got to work with. Is like, dude, I'm excited when you come back and show us what we're going to do. And then most of the time we were able to do it.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while we're like, well, I love this, this, and this, but let's take this and do it on the next one.
Yeah.
And let's, and I mean, we built some pretty cool shit. I mean,
we did.
but it was centered around the experience and the moments. And we wanted to complement the food with the design and the customer experience. And, Farrell always said, hey, we want people to come in to the shop and, have your blood pressure kind of raised a little bit and your heart rate raised because of all the colors and the sound and how everything's laid out. And then when you get your food, we want you to kind of relax and be able to sit there and enjoy your food. But yeah, to your point, I mean, there were these micro moments, and they usually centered around the bar, right? Because we wanted to draw people to the bar. So that got a lot of attention. The queue line and the seating and the colors and the textures. And I mean, I think we did a great job,
Yeah.
How many locations does Torchy have now? Or
I think today they've got maybe 120 something.
Yeah. Maybe when you left, it was in the 60s or so.
I was involved in the store, I think 89 or 90 before I left. Private equity came in. We don't have to talk about that other than the whole brand changed after that.
Yep.
The priorities changed.
That's
the value,
typical. Yeah.
But it, I would say that moment is rare, and we've also worked with people that have hired us to do the very same thing, but the ownership can't fully lean into whether it's budget, whether they think it's ROI, whether they think it's whatever they think. They won't fully lean into the total experience or what the user experience should be. And I find it real dissatisfying in a way. And I'm like, oh, if you only did ticket, a quarter away more,
Right.
because it just doesn't. The experience just doesn't.
It's falling flat.
Just doesn't start and stop in the arena, right? The experience is way out here,
Right.
And so you said something interesting that you said the ROI. When the private equity guys came in. There was a meeting and they started looking at some of the budgets that we spent on these stores, the last few leading up to them coming in and getting involved, this new C-suite, and they asked us, they said, what's the ROI of all this design stuff you're doing, the money you're spending? And that turned out to be an interesting conversation with those guys, and then they drove decisions that totally changed the whole protocol. But I a lot of the creatives that come on here, I ask the same question, like, what in your opinion? What's the ROI of that design, of the design that you put into something?
I think it's massive. I mean, you have cases like Apple, who's proven that. I mean, and they've been able to do it because they became one of the largest companies on the in the world, and they're most successful. And they're driven by design, right? So not just the product, but the user interface. When you go to their stores, when you go to their headquarters, I mean, look at the Cupertino headquarters. It's like incredible building, it's just. Does
it work for every company though? Can it work for every company?
I don't think it's appropriate for every company. Some companies are meant to be design led or experientially led, and other companies are meant to be super pragmatic and super like very, 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 they become a commodity and they're just price driven, right? So it's like a brand at the end of the day becomes a personality. It becomes the emotional frequency of how a customer relates to, this experience, this product, this thing that they're consuming or that they're a loyalist to. There are other things that you can easily replace, and it doesn't matter. There is never going to be loyalty there. An example would be like, I mean, I don't know if batteries are a good example, but like if you were to design a battery store, like what the hell, right? Like, so, okay, so this battery lasts a little longer, but is it worth the extra $3? No, fuck that. I'll just get more of the cheap ones, So all of a sudden it depends on what the product is. And then it's just like, there's not a lot of room for that I guess if it's not something that rounds out who adds value to your made up persona or who you are as an individual, right? Like, I mean, companies like Patagonia and even Rivian today, like you look at what they're doing. Rivian's a great example, right? Like Rivian, it's a pickup, but it's Patagonia pickup.
Yeah.
It's adventure pickup.
Yeah.
It's
a
not
lifestyle.
designed for a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
When they were going through the design process of that pickup, they learned by going out that most people in a city urban environment or suburban environment, they're not using their pickup for construction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That was a very small segment. They're buying the pickup because it was like inexpensive to buy or pragmatic, or they just, it was like part of their personality because they were like doers or they like to do adventuring, but no one had designed a pickup that's driven by experience in the outdoors. And it's like, look at the way they created that whole like camping stove that pulls out. And you can still put a piece of plywood in there, but it's not driven by that.
Yeah.
You know, so that was, Rivian's a great example of an automotive company listening to what people are wanting, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's real. I mean, I'm really excited to have had this conversation because I get stuck in terms of, because a lot of what I do is I sell, right? More or less. And I'm out finding work. I'm out trying to differentiate our company apart, you know, from the rest of the herd, which you could throw a rock and hit an architect in Austin, right? There's a lot of us. How do we
There's a lot of talented architecture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And aesthetics is very subjective. You can't argue is blue better than red or my work is better than your work. It's just like, who knows?
Personal preference, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so, but we do talk a lot about this experiential value and the quality of the culture, the quality of the brand or the product or the individual. And that I think is a real rich conversation to bring in.
Right.
So it's real fascinating to hear your side of it and your take and your passion. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, we could go on for a couple more hours, which, because
how long has it been? It's already been an hour. Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I really appreciate you guys inviting me on. It's great what you guys are doing. Yeah. It's cool.
This is definitely one we need to do to follow up.
Yeah, I think
I started writing some questions down that we didn't get to, and I definitely want to. If you grace us,
we didn't really get into like the business side of things and like scaling business and diversifying income flow and like the behind the scenes thing about the business of design or the business of construction.
Yeah.
And things to
because one of the first things Mark told me when he said, "Hey, I've got Dario coming on, and this is." The fact you said you're a doer and you get stuff done, that's near and dear to my heart. And I want to hear what that means to you and how you do that. Cause I mean, everybody, like I'm a student of really effective people that are able to, leverage their time and resources to get results and get bigger results. And how do you scale that? So I have a lot of questions around that. So we got to do this again.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Absolutely.